I'm going to tell a story tonight about Thomas the Rhymer. Now, Thomas was a man who lived in the 13th century in Scotland, but he also was a legend. He became very well known for his poetry and his prophecy. You see, it seems he was quite good at foretelling some pretty big events. So the tale that I'm going to tell you tonight is uh, it is attempting to explain how Thomas gained his gift. So one late summer afternoon, when Thomas was a young man, he decided he would leave his village and wander out on a solitary stroll in the nearby hills. When he had gone a good distance, he found himself at the top of the highest hill around, a hill that was barren except for one lone hawthorn tree. Now, Thomas, he stood there and he looked out over the great expanse before him, and he felt inspired, and he began to sing. And as he sang, he imagined his song reaching out past his village, past the fields, to all those places he did not yet know. And it was at this moment that Thomas heard the sound of bells. He turned around, and there, standing at that lone hawthorn tree, was a beautiful woman on top of a milk white steed. And she was wearing this gorgeous green gown embroidered with gold thread. And that mystical chiming he had heard was the sound of the dozens of silver bells woven into her horse's mane. And Thomas was overcome by this numinous vision, and he knelt down before her and exclaimed, "All hail the Queen of Heaven!" But the woman looked at him and shook her head. "No, no, Thomas, that is not my name." Well, Thomas was confused because if this beautiful apparition before him was not the Virgin Mary, who could she be? And how did she know her name, his name? Well, he didn't have long to ponder this because the woman asked him a question. She said, "Thomas, how would you like to see some marvels?" And Thomas thought he very much would like for the spectacular woman to show him some marvels, and so he nodded his assent. And she clapped her hands. And just like that, that hill was transformed. She pointed to her right, where there lay a path, a twisted path covered in thorns and weeds. And she said, "Thomas, how would you like to walk down that path with me?" And Thomas looked at that path and he saw those snaggly bits and imagined them tearing at his flesh. And he said, "No, no, my lady, I would not like to go down that path with you." And she said, "Very well, Thomas, but you should know that is a path of righteousness where very few have tread." And Thomas felt a bit guilty because he considered himself a good, virtuous man. And how could he not have known that that was a path of righteousness? But before he could think more on that, she pointed to her left, where there was a path that was the complete opposite of the first one. It was wide and welcoming and lined with tender green grasses and flowers in the fullness of their bloom. And Thomas, looking down that path, didn't want to walk. He wanted to run. And he said, "I would love to go down that path with you, my lady." And she laughed, said, "Are you sure, Thomas? Because that path is the path of wickedness. Although some do call it the road to heaven." Well, now Thomas really felt the heat rise to his cheeks. But again, she moved on, and this time she walked to a place between the two paths. And she gently parted some plants there and showed a third road. And this path was wild, looked as though it maybe had been cut by a deer or a fox or something not quite human. And Thomas, seeing this path, felt neither revulsion or compulsion the way he had with the first two paths, but rather the unfurling of this sense of rightness that some might call the stirrings of destiny. And he knew with everything in him that he must go down that path. And so he knelt for a second time, this time beginning to understand just who this woman was. And he said, I want to go down that path with you, my lady. She looked at him and said, Thomas, well, your deference is charming. I'm wondering if you might meet it with your daring. Do you dare to kiss my lips, knowing full well that if you do, for 7 years you shall not speak, and you shall belong to me? It's hard to say whether it was will or enchantment that made Thomas rise to his feet then and kiss the lips of the fairy queen. But that is what he did. And he got on the back of her horse and they rode down that path. But it wasn't before long, before that path disappeared. And Thomas found them in this strange liminal land, this place of no place. But they pressed on beneath the dome of black firmament where no orb was hung, neither sun nor moon. And water, they waded through water up to their knee, and all they heard was the sound of a sea that seemed to surround them. And they rode through this murk night until finally Thomas glimpsed a frail light that grew brighter and brighter until they found themselves in a garden. This garden was abundant, and Thomas realized he was famished, and so he leaned over and reached for a cluster of grapes. But the woman said, no. In this land, Thomas, your tongue shall touch only what I feed you. And she reached up and she plucked for him a ripe red apple. Now Thomas bit into this fruit, and tasting its sweet juice on his tongue quivered and quaked as though it were waking up for the very first time. As for what happened after the giving of this gift, I shall not say, because those are the dealings of the other world, and there are some things that must remain a mystery, to be sought after only by the worthy labors of your own imagination. But what I will say, because it is well known, is that Thomas, for those 7 years, served the fairy queen faithfully, silently, and well. And it is said that his time of indenture was not at all unpleasant. When the time came for him to return to his land, the fairy queen took him back to that barren hill with the lone tree. And then she leaned into him and whispered, Thomas, as you grant me your ear now, so will the nobles of your nation lend you their listening, and your tongue, made wise by fairy kiss and fairy fruit, shall only speak the truth. And she pressed one single finger upon his lips and said, you shall tell no lies. And that is how Thomas became true Thomas, and everything the fairy queen said came to pass. And he foretold the rise and demise of kings and the outcome of battles. And when he grew old, he walked back to that barren hill with the lone hawthorn tree, and he took his final rest. Although some say he never did die, but merely walked once more down that third road to the other world, where there he waits for this world to wake up and remember our tremendous need for fairy touched words and wisdom. So thank you for listening to that.